Have you ever wondered how a single moment can change everything? How one elevator ride could transform two strangers into something neither expected? Maya Chen learned the answer when her water broke between the 15th and 16th floors. The elevator lurched to a stop with a grinding metal sound that made Maya's stomach clench with more than just another contraction. She pressed her back against the mirrored wall, one hand supporting her 8 months pregnant belly, the other clutching the hospital appointment slip that had brought her here in the first place. The routine checkup she'd been rushing to suddenly seemed irrelevant as warm liquid trickled down her legs. No, she thought desperately. Not now. Not like this. The only other occupant of the elevator hadn't even looked up from his phone when she'd stepped on at the ground floor. He was tall, probably in his mid-30s, with dark hair styled impeccably despite the early morning hour. His charcoal suit was clearly expensive, the kind of tailored perfection that cost more than Maya made in 3 months at the diner. Everything about him screamed power and money, from his Italian leather shoes to the gold watch that caught the light as he typed. Another contraction hit, stronger than the last, and Maya couldn't suppress the small whimper that escaped her lips. That got his attention. Dark eyes, nearly black in the elevator's fluorescent lighting, snapped up to meet hers. For a moment, something flickered across his expression, too quick to read. Then his gaze dropped to her swollen belly, to the puddle forming at her feet, and his entire demeanor shifted. Maya Chun, she told herself firmly. You're stronger than this. You've survived worse than being trapped in an elevator. But even as she tried to convince herself, another wave of pain crashed through her, and she knew with absolute certainty that her daughter had decided today was the day to make her entrance into the world. The man was already moving, crossing the small space between them in 2 quick strides. He pocketed his phone and reached for the emergency call button, his movements controlled and precise. There was something about the way he carried himself that suggested he was used to taking charge, used to handling crises. Are you in labor? He asked, his voice surprisingly gentle despite the slight accent that made her think of old movies about Italian families. Maya tried to speak, but another contraction chose that moment to grip her, stronger than any she'd felt during the false alarms of the past few weeks. She nodded instead, gripping the handrail so hard her knuckles went white. The emergency phone crackled to life, and Maya heard him speaking in crisp, authoritative tones. This is Dante Romano. I'm trapped in elevator 7 with a woman in active labor. We need paramedics immediately, and someone needs to get this elevator moving or get us out of here. Now, the way he said his name, the instant deference in the voice that responded, told Maya that Dante Romano was someone important. Someone who was used to getting results when he spoke. But right now, none of that mattered as much as the fact that he was turning back to her with calm, capable hands and asking what she needed. My bag, Maya managed between breaths. I dropped it when the elevator stopped. It has my hospital information, my doctor's number. Dante retrieved her purse from where it had fallen near the doors, his movements careful and respectful. He didn't rifle through it, instead holding it out to her before seeming to realize she couldn't exactly dig through it while gripping the rail for dear life. What do you need me to find? He asked. Maya felt tears prick her eyes, though whether from pain, fear, or unexpected kindness from a stranger, she couldn't say. Her insurance card, she said. Dr. Patterson's business card. And there's a birth plan folder, though I guess that's not happening now. Dante found the items quickly, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he handled her things. He was already dialing Dr. Patterson's number before she'd finished explaining, speaking in low, urgent tones that she couldn't quite make out over the roar of her own breathing. When he hung up, he knelt beside her, and Maya found herself looking into eyes that were warmer than she'd expected. Dr. Patterson is on her way to the hospital, he told her. The paramedics are working on getting us out, but if the baby doesn't wait, I've delivered a calf or 2 on my grandfather's farm. Babies can't be much different. Despite everything, Maya almost smiled. A calf? Long story, Dante said, and there was something in his voice that suggested humor, though his expression remained serious. What's your name? Maya. Maya Chun. Beautiful name, he said simply. How far apart are your contractions, Maya? She tried to focus, tried to time the waves of pain that kept washing over her. Maybe 2 minutes? They started about an hour ago, but they weren't this strong. I thought I had time to get to the hospital. First baby? Maya nodded, then gasped as another contraction hit. This one felt different, more intense, and she knew with growing panic that things were moving faster than anyone had prepared her for. Dante seemed to sense her fear. Hey, he said softly, his voice cutting through her panic. Look at me, Maya. You're going to be fine. Your baby is going to be fine. I'm not going anywhere, and help is coming. There was something in his tone, a certainty that made her believe him despite the circumstances. She found herself focusing on his face, on the unexpected steadiness she found there. He had good hands, she realized dimly. Strong but careful, the kind of hands that suggested he was someone who protected things. The elevator shuddered, and for a moment Maya thought they were moving again. Instead, the lights flickered, and she heard shouting from somewhere above them. The reality of their situation hit her fully. She was going to have her baby here, in this tiny metal box, with a complete stranger. But as another contraction built, Dante was there, coaching her breathing in a low, calm voice, his presence somehow making the impossible situation feel manageable. When she gripped his hand without thinking, he didn't pull away. Instead, he squeezed back, his thumb stroking gently across her knuckles. That's it, he murmured. You're doing great. Just breathe through it. Maya had imagined giving birth dozens of times during her pregnancy. She'd pictured sterile hospital rooms and encouraging nurses, her sister holding her hand, her carefully planned birth playlist in the background. She'd never imagined it would happen like this, guided by a stranger whose voice seemed to cut through her fear and ground her in the moment. You're not what I expected, she found herself saying when the contraction passed. What did you expect? Someone who would panic, maybe, or try to get away from the crazy pregnant lady in the elevator. Dante's mouth quirked slightly, the first hint of a smile she'd seen from him. I don't panic easily, he said. And you're not crazy. You're having a baby. It's supposed to be overwhelming. There was something in the way he said it, a gentleness that didn't match his expensive suit or the authority in his voice when he'd spoken to the emergency operator. Maya found herself studying his face, noting the strong jawline, the way his dark eyes seemed to see everything, the careful way he held himself as if he was used to being watched. Another contraction hit, stronger than the rest, and Maya knew they were running out of time. She could feel pressure building, her body preparing for something she wasn't sure she was ready for. Dante must have seen something in her expression because he was already moving, shrugging out of his suit jacket and rolling up his sleeves. The elevator lurched again, and this time the emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in a strange, ethereal glow. Maya, he said quietly, I think we're going to meet your daughter very soon. The next few minutes passed in a blur of controlled urgency. Dante moved with surprising efficiency, using his expensive jacket to create a clean surface, talking her through each contraction with the kind of steady calm that made her believe everything would be all right. When Maya felt the overwhelming urge to push, he was there, his voice guiding her, his hands ready. You're incredible, he told her as she bore down with everything she had. Just like that, Maya. She's almost here. And then, with one final push that took every ounce of strength she had left, her daughter slipped into the world and into Dante's waiting hands. The tiny cry that filled the elevator was the most beautiful sound Maya had ever heard. But what took her breath away was the expression on Dante's face as he looked down at the baby. For a moment, his carefully controlled mask slipped entirely, revealing something raw and wondering. His hands, which had been so sure and steady throughout the entire ordeal, trembled slightly as he lifted the baby toward Maya. She's perfect, he said, his voice rough with an emotion Maya couldn't name. Absolutely perfect. Maya reached for her daughter with shaking arms, and when Dante placed the baby on her chest, skin to skin, she felt something shift in the universe. This tiny person, who had arrived in the most unexpected way possible, surrounded by a stranger's kindness. When she looked up at Dante, she found him watching them both with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was wonder there, yes, but something deeper. Something that looked almost like longing. The elevator chose that moment to lurch back to life, and within seconds they heard voices, footsteps, the sound of the doors being forced open. Paramedics flooded the small space, bringing equipment and professional efficiency, taking over with practiced hands. But even as they worked, checking vitals and preparing for transport, Maya found her eyes drawn back to Dante. He'd stepped back to give the medical team room, but he hadn't left. He stood against the far wall, watching, and when one of the paramedics asked who the father was, something flickered across his face. A friend, Maya said quickly, though she wasn't sure why. He helped deliver her. The paramedic nodded, already focused on the next task, but Maya saw Dante's shoulders relax slightly. As they prepared to move her to the stretcher, he approached again, his manner formal now that they had an audience. Maya, he said quietly, if you need anything at all, here's my card. Don't hesitate to use it. She took the simple white business card, noting only his name and a phone number. No company, no title, just Dante Romano in elegant script. Thank you, she managed, meaning it more than she'd ever meant anything. For everything. Their eyes met for a long moment, and Maya felt something pass between them, some acknowledgement of the extraordinary thing they'd just shared. Then the paramedics were wheeling her away, her daughter's tiny fingers wrapped around hers, and Dante Romano was just a memory of steady hands and a gentle voice in a crisis. But as the elevator doors closed behind them, Maya found herself clutching his business card like a lifeline, unable to shake the feeling that their story was far from over. Maya woke to the sound of hushed voices outside her hospital room door. The private room was a surprise. All soft lighting and comfortable furniture that looked nothing like the shared ward she'd expected her insurance to cover. Her daughter, who still didn't have a name, slept peacefully in the clear bassinet beside her bed, tiny fingers curled into perfect fists. Through the partially open door, Maya caught sight of a familiar figure speaking with someone in scrubs. Dante Romano stood with his back to her, but his posture was unmistakable, that careful control she remembered from the elevator. He was speaking to what appeared to be the head nurse, his voice too low for Maya to make out words, but the deference in the woman's responses was clear. When he turned and saw her watching, something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe, or satisfaction that she was awake. You're supposed to be resting, he said as he approached her bedside. The doctor said you did remarkably well, considering the circumstances. Maya struggled to sit up, wincing at the soreness that reminded her of everything her body had just been through. What are you doing here? Not that I'm not grateful, but I thought you'd have important business to get back to. Nothing more important than making sure you and the baby are all right, Dante replied, and the simple sincerity in his voice made something warm unfurl in Maya's chest. I wanted to ensure you had everything you needed. The private room, Maya said, understanding dawning. This wasn't my insurance. Dante's slight shrug was elegant, dismissive. Consider it a gift for the most extraordinary morning I've had in years. Besides, you need rest and quiet. The shared ward would have been chaos. Maya studied his face, noting the expensive watch, the way he moved with unconscious authority, the deference she'd witnessed from the hospital staff. Mr. Romano, she said carefully, what exactly do you do for a living? For a moment, something flickered across his features, too quick to read. I handle problems, he said finally. I make sure people are safe, that business runs smoothly. Import, export, various investments. It was a non-answer wrapped in reasonable words, and they both knew it. Maya had grown up in Chicago, had learned to recognize the signs of power that came from sources that couldn't be listed on tax returns. The expensive suit, the instant respect, the way he'd handled the emergency with such calm authority. You're involved in something dangerous, she said. It wasn't a question. Dante was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face. Would that frighten you? Honestly. Maya shifted the baby to her other arm, marveling at how perfectly she fit there. It should. A few days ago, it would have. But after what you did for us in that elevator, after seeing how gentle you are with her, I think I'm more curious than scared. Something in Dante's expression softened. Tell me about her father, he said quietly. And don't say there isn't one to tell me about. I saw how carefully you avoided that question with the paramedics. Maya's stomach clenched, not from physical pain this time, but from the familiar fear that had been her constant companion for the past 8 months. His name is Derek Walsh, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We were together for 2 years. I thought I loved him, thought he loved me. Past tense, Dante observed. I left him when I found out I was pregnant. Maya paused, searching for words that wouldn't make her sound weak or stupid. He has a temper. When he drinks, especially. And he drinks a lot. Did he hurt you? The question was asked in the same gentle tone Dante had used to coach her breathing in the elevator, but underneath it Maya heard something else. Something that reminded her that for all his kindness, this was a man who handled problems, who made people safe through methods she probably didn't want to know about. Sometimes, Maya admitted, never enough to leave marks where people could see them. He was smart about that. But the baby, I couldn't risk the baby. Does he know about her? Maya shook her head quickly. I found out I was pregnant 2 days after I left. I've been careful, staying away from places he might look. New apartment, new job, paid cash for everything. I thought I was safe. But something in her voice must have betrayed her, because Dante leaned forward, his attention suddenly laser-focused. Maya, what happened? What changed? Her phone, lying on the bedside table, chose that moment to buzz with a text message. Maya's blood ran cold as she saw Derek's name on the screen, and her hands began to shake as she read the words that destroyed any illusion of safety she'd managed to build. The message was brief but clear. Found you, bitch. Hope you enjoyed playing house, because playtime's over. We need to talk. Dante read the message over her shoulder, and Maya felt the change in him immediately. The gentle man who'd coached her through labor was still there, but underneath something else had awakened. Something that made the temperature in the room seem to drop several degrees. How did he get this number? Dante asked, his voice carefully controlled. I don't know, Maya whispered, clutching her daughter closer. I changed everything, got a new phone, new plan. I was so careful. Pack animals hunt differently when they're desperate, Dante said, almost to himself. Then, louder, Maya, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You and the baby are not safe. Not from someone who's been looking for 8 months and finally found you. The fear Maya had been holding at bay crashed over her like a wave. She'd known this day might come, had tried to prepare for it, but holding her newborn daughter made everything feel more urgent, more terrifying. I can't go to the police, she said helplessly. Derek's father is a judge, his uncle's a detective. I tried that route before I left. They made it very clear whose word would carry more weight. Dante stood, and Maya caught a glimpse of the man who commanded immediate respect from hospital staff and emergency operators. You're not going to the police, he said. You're going to let me handle this. I can't ask you to get involved in my problems, Maya protested. You've already done so much, and I don't even really know you. You know enough, Dante replied, his tone gentle again. You know I kept you safe in that elevator. You know I made sure you had the best possible care here. And you know I won't let anything happen to either of you. Maya wanted to argue, wanted to insist she could handle this herself the way she'd been handling everything else for months. But looking down at her daughter's peaceful face, she realized that her own stubborn independence might not be enough anymore. She wasn't just protecting herself now. What exactly are you offering? She asked quietly. Protection, Dante said simply. A place to stay where Derek Walsh can't find you. Time to recover and figure out your next steps. And a guarantee that he won't be a problem for much longer. The way he said that last part sent a chill down Maya's spine, but not entirely from fear. There was something comforting about the certainty in his voice, the unshakable confidence that he could make her problems disappear. What do you get out of it? Maya asked, because in her experience, powerful men always wanted something in return. Dante was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the baby in her arms. Peace of mind, he said finally. The knowledge that the two people who changed my morning, who reminded me what it feels like to be needed for something good, are safe. Maya studied his face, looking for deception or hidden motives, but found only sincerity and something that looked almost like vulnerability. This man, who clearly wielded considerable power in whatever world he inhabited, was asking for nothing more than the chance to protect her. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Derek, this one including a photo of the hospital's exterior. The implicit threat was clear. He knew where she was, and he was coming. Dante saw the message too, and when he looked up, his expression was resolved. Maya, he said quietly, you need to decide now. Trust me, or take your chances with a man who's already hurt you once and now knows you have something he considers his. Looking into Dante's dark eyes, Maya realized her choice had been made the moment he'd placed her newborn daughter in her arms with such careful reverence. Whatever danger he might represent, it paled in comparison to what Derek would do if he found them. All right, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. But I need to know what I'm getting into. No more vague answers about handling problems. If I'm trusting you with my daughter's safety, I need to know exactly who you are. Dante nodded slowly, respect flickering in his expression. Fair enough, he said. But that conversation happened somewhere safe, somewhere Derek Walsh can't find you. Are you ready to leave here? Maya looked around the comfortable room, then down at her daughter. Ready or not, staying meant putting them both at risk. And despite everything logical telling her to be wary, every instinct she had was telling her to trust the man who'd already proven himself when it mattered most. Yes, she said. We're ready. Dante's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a gleaming high-rise that Maya was certain cost more per month than she'd made in her entire life. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the city, while the interior was all clean lines and expensive furniture that somehow managed to feel warm rather than sterile. What struck Maya most, though, was how quiet it was, insulated from the chaos of the world below. This is temporary, she reminded herself as Dante showed her to the guest suite, her daughter sleeping peacefully in the carrier they'd borrowed from the hospital. Just until Derek loses interest or I figure out my next move. But as Dante moved around the space with easy familiarity, adjusting the temperature and checking that she had everything she needed, Maya found herself studying the small details that revealed more about him than his expensive clothes ever could. Family photos on the side tables showed him with an elegant older woman who had his eyes. Books in both English and Italian lined built-in shelves. A well-used espresso machine dominated one corner of the kitchen. This wasn't just a showplace for entertaining clients. This was home. The guest suite was larger than Maya's entire apartment had been, with a sitting area, a bedroom, and a bathroom that qualified as luxurious by any standard. But what made her throat tight with unexpected emotion was the bassinet that had appeared beside the bed, complete with soft blankets and a mobile that played gentle lullabies. When did you have time to get this? Maya asked, running her fingers over the impossibly soft cotton sheets. I made some calls while you were being discharged, Dante replied, his tone matter-of-fact. Babies need proper places to sleep. Maya looked up at him, this man who had turned his life upside down for 2 strangers, and felt something shift in her chest. She'd spent so long being careful, being suspicious of kindness because it had so often come with strings attached. But there was something about Dante's quiet competence that made her want to trust him despite every survival instinct she'd developed. Thank you, she said simply, meaning more than just the bassinet. Their eyes met across the room, and for a moment Maya felt the weight of everything they weren't saying. The danger she was running from, the world he belonged to, the impossible situation that had brought them together. Then her daughter stirred in her carrier, making the small sounds that meant she was waking up hungry, and the moment shifted back to something manageable. I should feed her, Maya said, already moving toward the baby. I'll get you something to eat too, Dante replied. You need to keep your strength up. As Maya settled into the comfortable armchair by the window to nurse her daughter, she watched Dante move around the kitchen with surprising ease. He wasn't just heating up takeout or making simple sandwiches. Instead, he was actually cooking, chopping vegetables with practiced efficiency, and seasoning what appeared to be a homemade sauce. You cook, Maya observed, unable to hide her surprise. My nana insisted, Dante replied without looking up from his work. Said no grandson of hers would starve because he was too proud to learn his way around a kitchen. She had very strong opinions about self-sufficiency. There was warmth in his voice when he mentioned his grandmother, a softness that seemed at odds with the controlled authority Maya had witnessed at the hospital. She found herself wanting to know more about the influences that had shaped him, about the family that had taught a man in his dangerous profession to be gentle with babies and cook elaborate meals for virtual strangers. Tell me about her, Maya said, adjusting her daughter's position as she continued nursing. Dante was quiet for a moment, his hands stilling over the cutting board. She raised me after my parents died, he said finally. I was 8 when it happened, car accident on a rainy night in October. Nana stepped in without hesitation, this tiny woman who spoke more Italian than English and had opinions about everything from how to make proper sauce to how a man should treat the people he cares about. Maya heard the love in his voice, but also something else. Loss, maybe, or the particular sadness that came from learning too young that safety was never guaranteed. Is she still alive? Maya asked gently. Yes, though she's getting frail. Lives in a beautiful house in the suburbs with a garden that could feed half the neighborhood. She still tries to feed me every time I visit, convinced I'm too thin despite all evidence to the contrary. Maya smiled at the image of this powerful man being fussed over by a concerned grandmother. It was easier to picture than she'd expected, and something about that accessibility made her heart do something complicated in her chest. Her daughter had finished eating and was making the contented sounds that usually preceded sleep. Maya was adjusting her clothing when she realized Dante was watching them both with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was something almost hungry in his gaze, though not in any way that made her uncomfortable. It was more like he was memorizing the scene, storing away this moment of domestic tranquility. Would you like to hold her? Maya asked impulsively, then immediately wondered where the offer had come from. Dante's hands stilled over the stove. Are you sure? I don't want to presume. Maya was already standing, her daughter alert but calm in her arms. You delivered her, she said simply. You have more right than most. When Maya placed the baby in Dante's arms, she was struck again by how naturally he held her. His large hands supported her tiny head with perfect gentleness, and when the baby opened her eyes and seemed to focus on his face, something in his expression cracked open completely. Hello, beautiful girl, he murmured, his voice soft in a way Maya had never heard it. Look at you, already taking in everything around you. You're going to be formidable, aren't you? The baby made a small sound, almost like she was responding to him, and Dante's smile was so genuine that Maya felt her breath catch. This was a side of him she suspected few people ever saw, vulnerable and wondering and completely captivated by the tiny life in his arms. You're a natural, Maya said, settling back into her chair to watch them together. I've always wanted children, Dante admitted, his gaze still fixed on the baby. Someday, when my life is different, when I can offer them the kind of safety and stability they deserve. There was something wistful in his tone that made Maya study his profile more carefully. What would have to change? She asked carefully about your life. Dante was quiet for a long moment, gently swaying as the baby's eyes began to drift closed. Everything, he said finally. The business I'm in, it's not compatible with family life. Too many enemies, too much risk. A man in my position, the people he cares about become targets. Maya felt a chill run down her spine, not because she was afraid of him, but because she was beginning to understand the weight he carried. The isolation that came from knowing that caring about someone meant putting them in danger. What exactly is your business? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante looked at her then, and Maya saw him weighing his words carefully. I run an organization that handles problems other people can't solve, he said finally. We provide protection, we ensure debts are paid, we maintain order in situations where the law isn't sufficient. Some people call it organized crime. I prefer to think of it as organized justice. Maya absorbed this information, trying to reconcile the man holding her daughter so tenderly with the implications of what he was telling her. Are you telling me you're in the mafia? She asked, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. That word gets thrown around a lot, Dante replied. What I am is someone who protects the people and businesses in my territory. Someone who makes sure contracts are honored and that the vulnerable aren't exploited by those with more power. Maya studied his face, looking for signs of deception or rationalization, but found only sincerity. She thought about Derek, about the judges and police officers who had dismissed her concerns because her abuser came from the right family, about all the times the law had failed people like her while protecting people like him. So when you say you'll protect me from Derek, she said slowly, you mean permanently. I mean completely, Dante replied, and the quiet certainty in his voice sent another chill down Maya's spine, though this time it wasn't entirely from fear. Their conversation was interrupted by the soft chime of Dante's phone. He glanced at the screen, and Maya saw his expression harden immediately. The gentle man holding her daughter didn't disappear, but underneath him something else awakened. What is it? Maya asked, though part of her already knew. Derek Walsh just left his hotel, Dante said, his voice carefully controlled. He's heading toward the hospital. Apparently, he thinks you might still be there. Maya's stomach clenched with familiar fear. How do you know that? I have people keeping an eye on him, Dante replied matter-of-factly. The moment he showed up in the city, I wanted to know where he was and what he was doing. The casual way he said it, like having Derek under surveillance was the most natural thing in the world, reminded Maya again of exactly who she was dealing with. This wasn't just a wealthy businessman with a protective streak. This was someone who commanded resources she couldn't even imagine. Dante was already moving, transferring the baby back to Maya's arms with infinite care before pulling out his phone again. His conversation was brief and conducted in rapid Italian, but Maya caught enough to understand that he was giving orders, deploying people to handle a situation. When he hung up, his attention focused entirely on her. "Maya," he said gently, "I need you to know that Derek Walsh will not get within a mile of you or the baby. But I also need you to understand what that means." Maya looked down at her daughter, who had fallen asleep in her arms, completely oblivious to the storm gathering around them. "What does it mean?" she asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer. "It means I'm going to make sure he understands that pursuing you is more dangerous than walking away," Dante said simply. "It means he's going to realize that some things aren't worth the cost." The euphemism was gentle, but Maya understood what he wasn't saying directly. She should have been terrified, should have been grabbing her daughter and running from the very real danger that Dante Romano represented. Instead, she found herself thinking about Derek's hands around her throat, about the fear she'd carried for 8 months, about the helplessness of knowing the law wouldn't protect her. "Will you hurt him?" she asked quietly. "I'll do whatever is necessary to ensure he's no longer a threat to you," Dante replied, and Maya heard both the promise and the warning in those words. Maya was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he was telling her. Finally, she looked up at him, this man who had appeared in her life like a guardian angel with blood on his hands. "I should be afraid of you," she said. "Are you?" Maya considered the question seriously, looking at Dante's face, remembering the gentleness of his hands when he'd delivered her daughter, the reverence in his voice when he'd called her perfect. "No," she said finally. "I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid of what happens if you decide I'm not worth protecting." Dante moved closer, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. "Maya," he said quietly, "you and your daughter are worth protecting. You're worth whatever it costs to keep you safe. I need you to believe that." Looking into his dark eyes, seeing the sincerity there, Maya found that she did believe it. This man, who could apparently make people disappear with a phone call, who moved through a world of violence and power that she could barely comprehend, had decided that she mattered, that her daughter mattered. And for the first time since she'd seen Derek's name on her phone screen, Maya felt something that might have been peace. "Okay," she said simply. "I trust you." Something shifted in Dante's expression, a warmth that made Maya realize how much her trust meant to him. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, his fingers brushed gently against her cheek. "Thank you," he said, and Maya heard volumes in those 2 words. Gratitude, promise, and something that might have been the beginning of something neither of them had expected. Outside, the city hummed with evening traffic and ordinary life. But here in Dante's penthouse, holding her daughter while this dangerous man promised to keep them safe, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in months. She felt like she was home. Maya woke to the sound of soft Italian being murmured somewhere in the penthouse, followed by what sounded like an argument conducted in whispers. Her daughter was still sleeping peacefully in the bassinet beside her bed, but the morning light streaming through the windows suggested it was later than she'd expected. 3 days had passed since Derek's threatening messages. 3 days of unexpected domestic tranquility that had lulled Maya into something dangerously close to contentment. Dante had been the perfect host and an even better surrogate father, taking to caring for the baby with a natural ease that left Maya wondering how someone so gentle could survive in the world he'd described. The voices in the main room grew slightly louder, and Maya caught enough to understand that someone was frustrated with Dante's recent unavailability. She dressed quickly and emerged from the guest suite to find Dante standing near the windows, his phone pressed to his ear, his expression patient but firm. "No, Marco," he was saying in English, presumably for her benefit. "The Torino situation can wait another week. Handle the negotiation yourself. I trust your judgment." The voice on the other end grew more agitated, and Maya caught something about missed opportunities and questioning leadership. Dante's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained calm. My priorities have shifted temporarily, he said with quiet authority. Anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to discuss it with me in person when I'm back in the office. Until then, you have your orders. When he hung up, Maya could see the tension in his shoulders, the weight of managing an organization that clearly didn't understand why their leader had suddenly become unavailable. You're neglecting your business because of us, Maya said softly. That can't be sustainable. Dante turned to look at her, and his expression softened immediately. My business has survived 20 years, he said. It can survive a few weeks of me prioritizing something more important. The casual way he said it, like she and her daughter were obviously more important than whatever empire he'd built, made something warm unfurl in Maya's chest. But it also reminded her of the impossibility of their situation. She couldn't ask him to abandon his responsibilities indefinitely, but she wasn't sure she was ready to face the world without his protection. Speaking of priorities, Dante continued, changing the subject with the kind of smooth transition that suggested he'd noticed her discomfort. I'd like you to meet someone today. If you're feeling up to it. Maya raised an eyebrow. Someone from your world? My nana, Dante said, and the warmth in his voice was unmistakable. I told her about you and the baby, and she's been threatening to storm up here herself if I don't bring you to visit soon. The idea of meeting Dante's grandmother sent a flutter of nerves through Maya's stomach. This wasn't just meeting family. It was crossing another line into whatever was developing between them, making it more real and more complicated. Are you sure that's wise? Maya asked carefully. Getting your family involved in your temporary protection arrangement? Dante was quiet for a moment, his dark eyes studying her face. Is that what this is? He asked softly. A temporary arrangement? Maya felt her breath catch at the question and everything it implied. She looked down at her daughter, who was starting to stir in her arms, making the small sounds that meant she was waking up hungry. The truth was, somewhere in the past 3 days, this had stopped feeling temporary. Watching Dante handle midnight feedings with patient competence, seeing him research baby development with the same thorough attention he probably applied to business deals, witnessing his genuine delight every time her daughter looked at him, Maya had started imagining what it might be like if this were real. I don't know, she admitted quietly. I don't know what this is anymore. Dante stepped closer, close enough that Maya could smell his cologne, could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes. Then let's find out, he said gently. One day at a time, starting with lunch with a woman who's been dying to spoil a baby ever since her only grandson decided he was too dangerous to give her great-grandchildren. The drive to Dante's grandmother's house took them through neighborhoods that gradually shifted from urban sophistication to suburban comfort. Maya found herself studying Dante's profile as he drove, noting how his shoulders relaxed the farther they got from the city center, how something almost boyish crept into his expression when he talked about his nana's legendary cooking. She's going to try to feed us enough for 10 people, he warned as they pulled into the driveway of a beautifully maintained colonial house with flower beds that belonged in a magazine. And she's going to ask you very personal questions while pretending it's just friendly conversation. She's not subtle. Maya smiled despite her nerves. I think I can handle one elderly Italian grandmother. Famous last words, Dante muttered, but he was smiling too. The woman who answered the door was tiny, probably not even 5 feet tall, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon and eyes that were unmistakably related to Dante's. But what struck Maya immediately was the warmth that radiated from her, the way her face lit up when she saw them. Dante, she said, reaching up to cup his face in her hands, you look tired. And thin. Are you eating? Yes, Nana, Dante replied patiently, leaning down to kiss her cheek. I'm eating. I'd like you to meet Maya and her daughter. The older woman's attention shifted to Maya, and for a moment Maya felt like she was being thoroughly assessed. Then Dante's grandmother smiled, and Maya understood immediately where Dante had learned his capacity for making people feel safe. Maya, she said warmly, holding out her hands. Welcome. Dante told me what happened, how you met. What a blessing you've been to each other. Before Maya could formulate a response, she found herself being gently guided into the house. Dante's grandmother cooing over the baby with the kind of natural grandmother instincts that made Maya's throat tighten with unexpected emotion. What's her name, Kara? The older woman asked, reaching out to stroke the baby's cheek with infinite gentleness. She doesn't have one yet, Maya admitted, feeling slightly embarrassed. I wanted to wait until I felt safe, until I knew what her life was going to be like. Dante's grandmother looked up at her with understanding in her warm brown eyes. Smart girl, she said approvingly. A name is powerful. You want to choose it when you can see her future clearly. Over lunch, which was indeed enough food for 10 people, Maya watched Dante with his grandmother and saw yet another facet of the man who'd become so important to her life. Here, he was just a grandson who clearly adored the woman who'd raised him, who listened patiently to her concerns about his eating habits and her neighbor's various dramas, who helped her reach things on high shelves without being asked. When the baby started fussing during dessert, Dante immediately reached for her, settling her against his shoulder with the practiced ease he'd developed over the past few days. Maya watched his grandmother watching them, and saw something like satisfaction cross the older woman's features. He's good with her, Dante's grandmother observed, seemingly to Maya, but clearly intending for Dante to hear. Very good, Maya agreed, unable to keep the warmth out of her voice. He was good with children even when he was a child himself, the older woman continued, her tone casual, but her eyes sharp. Always protecting the smaller ones at school, bringing home strays and injured animals. I used to tell him he'd make a wonderful father someday. Maya felt heat creep up her neck as she realized she was being match-made by an expert. Dante, for his part, seemed entirely focused on the baby, but Maya caught the slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Nah," he said mildly. "I think you're embarrassing Maya." "Nonsense," his grandmother replied briskly. "I'm simply stating facts. Some men are born to be protectors, to build families. Dante is one of those men. The right woman would be very lucky indeed." The conversation moved on to safer topics, but Maya found herself stealing glances at Dante throughout the afternoon, imagining what their life might look like if this weren't just temporary protection. If this were real, chosen, permanent. On the drive back to the city, her daughter sleeping peacefully in the car seat Dante had somehow acquired, Maya found herself thinking about belonging. She'd spent so much of her adult life feeling displaced, first by Derek's control and then by the necessity of hiding, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be welcomed somewhere without conditions or expectations. "Your grandmother is wonderful," Maya said softly. "She likes you," Dante replied. "She doesn't like everyone." "How can you tell?" "She used the good china," Dante said with a smile. "And she told you about my childhood." Nana only shares family stories with people she considers family. Maya felt something flutter in her chest at the word family. "Is that what she considers me?" Dante was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the steering wheel. "I think she sees what I see," he said finally. "Someone who belongs." That evening, after they'd settled into the comfortable domestic routine they'd developed, Maya found herself watching Dante feed her daughter while she prepared her own dinner. He'd insisted on taking the evening feeding duties, claiming he needed the practice, but Maya suspected he simply enjoyed the quiet intimacy of it. "She has your eyes," Maya observed, settling onto the couch beside them with her plate. Dante looked up, startled. "What?" "When she looks at you," Maya clarified, feeling suddenly self-conscious. "She focuses on your face the same way, like she's memorizing you." Dante looked down at the baby, who was indeed gazing up at him with the kind of intent focus that newborns usually reserve for their primary caregivers. Something in his expression shifted, becoming soft and wondering. "I love her," he said quietly, the admission seeming to surprise him as much as it did Maya. "I know I have no right to. I know she's not mine, but I love her like she is." Maya felt tears prick her eyes at the raw honesty in his voice. The baby in question had finished her bottle and was making the contented sounds that usually preceded sleep, but she seemed reluctant to look away from Dante's face. "She loves you too," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can see it." Dante's eyes met hers across the small space between them, and Maya felt something shift in the air, something that had been building for days finally reaching a tipping point. Without the baby as a buffer between them, the attraction that had been simmering beneath their careful friendship suddenly blazed to life. "Maya," Dante said softly, his voice rough with something that might have been need. Before she could lose her nerve, Maya leaned forward and kissed him. It was meant to be gentle, experimental, but the moment their lips touched, something ignited between them. Dante's free hand came up to cup her face, his thumb stroking across her cheek as he kissed her back with a hunger that had clearly been held in check for days. When they broke apart, both breathing heavily, the baby had fallen asleep in Dante's arms, completely oblivious to the momentous shift that had just occurred between the adults responsible for her care. "I've wanted to do that since the elevator," Dante admitted, his forehead resting against Maya's. Maya smiled, feeling something that might have been joy unfurling in her chest. "I was hoping you would." They were interrupted by the sharp chime of Dante's phone, a sound that had become familiar but had never felt quite so unwelcome. Dante glanced at the screen, and Maya watched his expression harden immediately. "What is it?" she asked, though part of her already knew. "Derek found your sister," Dante said, his voice carefully controlled. "He's at her apartment now, asking questions about where you might be hiding." Maya's blood turned to ice in her veins. Lily was only 18, just starting college, completely innocent in all of this. The thought of Derek anywhere near her baby sister made Maya feel physically sick. "Is she safe?" Maya asked, already standing, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. "For now," Dante replied, already moving toward his phone. But he left her a message. "He wants you to call him within the hour, or he's going to assume she knows more than she's telling." The implied threat hung in the air between them, clear and terrifying. Maya sank back onto the couch, her hands shaking as the reality of the situation crashed over her. She'd brought danger not just to herself, but to the people she loved most in the world. Dante was already on the phone, his voice crisp and authoritative as he gave rapid orders in Italian. When he hung up, his attention focused entirely on her, and Maya saw something in his expression that she'd never seen before. Something that made her remember exactly who she was dealing with, and what he was capable of when the people he cared about were threatened. "Maya," he said quietly, his voice carrying an edge that sent shivers down her spine. "Derek Walsh just made the biggest mistake of his life, and I'm going to make sure he understands that." Maya should have known better than to leave the penthouse alone. Should have listened to Dante's careful instructions about staying inside until Derek was no longer a threat. But her daughter had been fussy all morning, and Maya had convinced herself that a quick walk to the coffee shop on the ground floor would be safe enough. She realized her mistake the moment Derek stepped out from behind a pillar in the building's elegant lobby, his smile cold and triumphant. He looked exactly the same as he had 8 months ago, all practiced charm and barely contained violence, dressed in the expensive clothes his family's money afforded him. "Hello, Maya," Derek said conversationally, as if they were old friends running into each other by chance. "Nice place you've got here. Much better than that rat hole you were hiding in before." Maya's blood turned to ice, but she forced herself to remain calm. Her daughter was sleeping peacefully in the stroller, completely unaware of the danger they were in. Maya's hand moved instinctively to her phone, but Derek's laugh stopped her. "I wouldn't," he said, stepping closer. "You call your new boyfriend, and little Lily gets a visit from some friends of mine. You remember my friends, don't you? The ones who don't ask questions when I need favors?" Maya remembered. Derek's friends were why she'd never been able to get help from the police, why restraining orders had been meaningless pieces of paper. Men with badges and authority who owed Derek's family loyalty that went back generations. "What do you want?" Maya asked quietly, her voice steadier than she felt. "What's mine?" Derek replied, his gaze dropping to the stroller. "Starting with my daughter." "She's not yours," Maya said fiercely. "You don't even know her name." "Because you stole her from me," Derek snapped, his mask of civility slipping. 8 months, Maya. 8 months you've been hiding from me like I was some kind of monster. All I wanted was to work things out, to be a family." Maya stared at him, remembering the bruises he'd left on her ribs, the fear she'd lived with every day they'd been together. "Work things out," she repeated incredulously. "We're leaving," Derek said, his hand closing around her wrist with bruising force. "Right now? You, me, and the baby. We're going to have the conversation we should have had months ago." Maya tried to pull away, but Derek's grip tightened painfully. Around them, the lobby continued its normal morning bustle. Business, people heading to work, residents walking their dogs. None of them noticed the drama playing out by the elevators, the way Derek's fingers were leaving marks on Maya's skin. "Let go of me," Maya said, loud enough that several people turned to look. Derek's smile turned dangerous. "Careful, Maya. You make a scene, and I make a phone call." Your sister's apartment building has terrible security, you know. Anyone could walk right in. The threat was clear, and Maya felt her resolve crumble. Derek knew her too well, knew exactly how to manipulate her protective instincts. She thought of Lily, innocent and completely unprepared for the kind of violence Derek was capable of, and felt trapped all over again. The elevator ride to the parking garage felt endless. Derek kept up a stream of casual conversation, talking about their future together as if the past 8 months hadn't happened, as if Maya had simply been on an extended vacation rather than fleeing for her life. All the while, his hand remained locked around her wrist, a constant reminder of the control he thought he had over her. It wasn't until they reached his car that Maya realized Derek had made a critical error. In all his planning, all his surveillance of her movements, he'd failed to account for the fact that she was no longer the isolated, frightened woman who'd fled him 8 months ago. Now she belonged somewhere. Now she had someone who would move heaven and earth to find her. As Derek forced her into the passenger seat, Maya caught sight of the security camera mounted near the elevator bank. Dante would see this. He would know what had happened, and he would come for her. The thought gave her strength as Derek drove them away from safety, toward whatever confrontation he'd been planning. Maya kept her daughter close, whispering soft reassurances that were as much for herself as for the baby, and waited for the cavalry she knew was coming. Derek had chosen an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where screams wouldn't carry and bodies could disappear without questions. Maya felt sick as she recognized the location, remembering the stories Derek used to tell about his father's business associates, about problems that got solved in places exactly like this. Inside, the space was cold and empty except for a few chairs and a table that suggested Derek had been planning this for longer than Maya had realized. He directed her to sit in one of the chairs, his hand never leaving the gun he'd produced from his jacket. "Now we talk," Derek said, settling across from her with the comfortable authority of a man who believed he held all the cards. "About what you stole from me. About how you're going to make it right." Maya held her daughter closer, drawing strength from the warm weight of the baby against her chest. "She's not yours to steal," Maya said quietly. "You gave up any right to her when you put your hands on me." Derek's expression darkened, the charm he'd been maintaining finally slipping completely. "That was a misunderstanding," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "You provoked me. You made me lose my temper." "I was pregnant," Maya said, her own anger finally rising to match his. "I was carrying your child, and you hit me because dinner was late." The sound of breaking glass interrupted Derek's response, followed immediately by the sharp crack of wood splintering. Maya's heart leaped as she recognized the sound of a professional entry, fast and precise and utterly controlled. Derek spun toward the noise, his gun raised, but he was already too late. Dante appeared in the doorway like an avenging angel, flanked by 2 men Maya didn't recognize, but who moved with the same lethal competence. All 3 were armed, but it was the look on Dante's face that made Derek take an involuntary step backward. Maya had seen Dante gentle and kind, had seen him powerful and protective, but this was something else entirely. This was the man who commanded an empire built on fear and respect, who made problems disappear when they threatened what he cared about. "Let her go," Dante said, his voice carrying an authority that made the air in the warehouse seem to vibrate with tension. Derek's gun swung toward Maya and the baby, his panic making him desperate and dangerous. "This doesn't concern you, Romano," he said, trying to project confidence he clearly didn't feel. "This is family business." Dante stepped into the warehouse proper, his movements fluid and completely, without fear despite the weapon pointed at the woman he loved. "You made it my business when you touched what's mine," he said quietly. The possessiveness in his voice should have offended Maya, should have reminded her of Derek's controlling behavior. Instead, it made her feel safer than she had since Derek had grabbed her in the lobby. Because Dante's protection came without chains, came with respect and choice and the absolute certainty that he would destroy anything that tried to harm her. "She's not yours," Derek said, but there was uncertainty creeping into his voice. "She's the mother of my child." "No," Dante replied, taking another step forward. "She's the woman I love, and that baby is going to grow up knowing she's safe, because I'll always be there to protect them both." Maya's breath caught at the simple declaration, at the way Dante said it like an unshakable truth rather than a romantic gesture. She'd known they were falling for each other, had felt the connection growing stronger every day, but hearing him say it so plainly, so publicly, made something settle into place in her chest. Derek's gun wavered, his attention split between Dante and the other men who had fanned out to flank him. "You can't just take someone else's family," he said desperately. "I'm not taking anything," Dante said, his voice growing softer and therefore more dangerous. "Maya made her choice when she trusted me to keep her safe. The baby will make her choice when she's old enough to understand that I'm the one who was there for her first breath, her first feeding, her first night home from the hospital." The truth of that statement hit Derek like a physical blow. Maya could see the exact moment he realized that he'd already lost, that whatever claim he'd thought he had on her and their daughter had been severed the moment she'd chosen Dante's protection over Derek's threats. What happened next was swift and professional and completely final. Derek made the mistake of trying to use Maya as a bargaining chip one final time, and discovered that threatening Dante Romano's family was a line that couldn't be crossed, and survived. When it was over, when Derek was no longer a threat to anyone, Dante's attention focused entirely on Maya and the baby. His hands were gentle as he helped her to her feet, his voice soft as he asked if she was hurt, if the baby was all right. "It's over," he said, pulling them both into his arms. "He can't hurt you anymore. No one can." Maya sagged against him, the adrenaline finally leaving her system and taking her strength with it. She thought she should be horrified by what had just happened, by the violence that had been necessary to ensure her safety. Instead, she felt only relief and a bone-deep gratitude that this man had come for her when she needed him most. The drive back to the penthouse passed in a blur of protective embraces and whispered reassurances. Dante held them both as if he was afraid they might disappear, his hands mapping their forms to convince himself they were real and safe and his. It wasn't until they were back in the safety of his home, the baby fed and settled and sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, that the magnitude of what had changed between them really hit Maya. Derek was gone, permanently and completely, but that didn't mean her life could simply go back to what it had been before. Dante seemed to sense her internal struggle because he sat beside her on the couch and took her hands in his touch warm and steady and completely without pressure. "Maya," he said quietly, "I need you to know that what I said in the warehouse wasn't just for his benefit. I meant every word." Maya looked into his dark eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and hope and a love that took her breath away. "I know," she said softly. "I love you too." Dante's smile was brilliant, transforming his face completely. "Then marry me," he said simply. "Let me adopt her legally. Let me be her father in every way that matters. Let me spend the rest of my life making sure you both know how precious you are." Maya felt tears prick her eyes at the simple proposal, at the way he asked for everything she wanted to give and offered everything she needed in return. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes to all of it." When Dante kissed her this time, it was with the knowledge that they were no longer building something temporary, no longer pretending this was just protection and proximity. This was love and commitment and the beginning of the family they both wanted. And somewhere in her bassinet, their daughter slept on, completely unaware that she'd just gained a father who would love her as fiercely as if she were his own blood, and a future brighter than anything Maya had ever dared to dream. 6 months later, Maya stood in front of the full-length mirror in Dante's grandmother's bedroom, adjusting the simple white dress that somehow made her feel more beautiful than any elaborate gown could have. The ceremony would be small, just family and Dante's closest associates, but Maya had never been more certain of anything in her life. Through the window, she could see the garden where they'd chosen to hold the wedding, decorated with white roses and twinkling lights that would glow softly in the evening air. Dante's grandmother had insisted on hosting, claiming that any granddaughter-in-law of hers deserved a proper celebration in a place filled with love and history. A soft knock on the door interrupted Maya's thoughts, and Dante's grandmother entered carrying 6-month-old Isabella, who was wide awake and taking in everything around her with the kind of alert curiosity that had become her trademark. "She's been asking for her mama," the older woman said with a smile, settling the baby in Maya's arms. and I think she approves of the dress." Isabella indeed seemed fascinated by the flowing white fabric, her tiny fingers grasping at the delicate lace sleeves while she babbled contentedly. She'd grown so much since that terrifying day in the elevator, developing into a bright, happy baby who smiled at everyone but reserved her biggest grins for the man she'd learned to call Papa. The name had been Isabella's choice, her first clear word emerging one morning when Dante had been feeding her breakfast. Maya had been in the kitchen preparing coffee when she'd heard Dante's sharp intake of breath, followed by his voice, thick with emotion, asking Isabella to say it again. "Papa," the baby had repeated obligingly, and Maya had turned to find Dante with tears in his eyes as he held his daughter close. Because that's what Isabella was now, legally and completely. The adoption papers had been finalized 3 weeks after Derek's death, Dante's lawyers working with quiet efficiency to ensure there would never be any question about his parental rights. Isabella Romano, the papers read, and Maya still got a flutter in her stomach every time she saw their daughter's new name. "Are you ready, Cara?" Dante's grandmother asked gently, her warm eyes understanding. "It's normal to have nerves, even when you're certain of your choice." Maya looked down at Isabella, who was studying her face with the kind of intense focus she usually reserved for new toys or particularly interesting ceiling fans. This baby had changed everything, had brought Dante into their lives in the most unexpected way, and created a family none of them had been looking for, but all of them desperately needed. "I'm ready," Maya said, and she meant it completely. The ceremony itself was perfect in its simplicity. Dante stood beneath an archway of roses, devastating in a charcoal suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the warmth in his dark eyes. When Maya walked toward him with Isabella in her arms, his smile was so brilliant that she felt her breath catch with the sheer joy of it. Dante's associates filled the small gathering, men who looked like they could handle any crisis but who melted completely when Isabella gurgled at them during the vows. Maya had been surprised to discover how naturally Dante's world had adapted to his new priorities, how his organization had restructured around his commitment to being present for his family. Marco, his second-in-command, had stepped up to handle day-to-day operations with an efficiency that proved Dante's trust had been well-placed. The business still ran smoothly, still commanded the same respect, but now everyone understood that Dante Romano's family came first, always and without exception. When the minister asked if there were any objections to the union, Isabella chose that moment to let out a happy squeal that made everyone laugh, including Dante, who reached for her immediately. "I think that's approval," Dante said, settling Isabella against his shoulder as he took Maya's hand with his free one. The traditional way of things might have called for rings to be carried by a small child, but their daughter had served as both ring-bearer and blessing, her presence a reminder of the miracle that had brought them all together. Maya's voice was steady as she spoke her vows, promising to love and trust this man who had proven himself worthy of both in the most extraordinary circumstances. When Dante spoke his promises in return, his voice rough with emotion, Maya knew that whatever challenges their future might hold, they would face them together. "You may kiss your bride," the minister said with a smile, and when Dante leaned down to claim Maya's lips, Isabella reached out to pat both their faces, as if she was determined to be part of this moment too. The reception that followed was a revelation in warmth and acceptance. Maya watched Dante's associates, men who commanded fear and respect in their professional lives, compete for the chance to hold Isabella, who basked in the attention with regal composure. These were people who had welcomed Maya into their extended family without question, who treated her with the same protective regard they showed Dante. As the evening wound down and the last guests departed, Maya found herself standing in the garden with Dante and Isabella, surrounded by the soft glow of fairy lights and the lingering scent of roses. The baby was finally showing signs of tiredness, her eyes growing heavy as she fought to stay awake for this special day. "Mrs. Romano," Dante said softly, testing out Maya's new name with obvious satisfaction. "It has a nice ring to it," Maya replied, leaning into his warmth as they watched their daughter's eyes drift closed. The past 6 months had been a whirlwind of changes, but good ones that had strengthened rather than strained their relationship. Maya had discovered a talent for the legitimate side of Dante's business empire, her background in hospitality translating surprisingly well to managing the restaurants and hotels that formed the public face of his organization. She'd found purpose and fulfillment in work that felt meaningful, and Dante had found peace in knowing his wife was his true partner in building something lasting. "Think she's ready to go home?" Dante asked, stroking Isabella's dark hair with infinite gentleness. Home was the penthouse they'd renovated together, transforming the sophisticated bachelor pad into a warm family space filled with toys and laughter and the kind of comfortable chaos that came with a baby who was growing more active every day. Maya's favorite room was the nursery, painted in soft yellows and greens, where Dante read bedtime stories in English and Italian, while Isabella listened with the serious attention of someone determined to understand every word. As they gathered their things and prepared to leave, Maya caught sight of Dante's grandmother watching them from the doorway, her expression soft with the satisfaction of seeing her grandson finally, completely happy. The older woman had taken to grandmotherhood with enthusiasm, spoiling Isabella shamelessly and offering Maya the kind of maternal support she'd missed since losing her own mother years earlier. The drive home was peaceful, Isabella sleeping soundly in her car seat while Maya and Dante talked quietly about the day, about the future, about the small domestic details that made up their shared life. When they reached their building, Dante carried the sleeping baby while Maya gathered the flowers and gifts from the ceremony. The elevator that had brought them together 6 months ago carried them up to their floor, but this time Maya felt only contentment as the floors ticked by. The space that had once trapped her in crisis now lifted her toward the life she'd never dared dream of, toward safety and love and the family that had emerged from the most unlikely circumstances. As they settled Isabella in her crib and prepared for bed themselves, Maya reflected on the strange paths that had led them here. How have our lives changed when we least expect it? She wondered, thinking about how differently this day might have ended if Derek had never found her, if Dante hadn't been in that elevator, if a dozen small decisions had been made differently. But fate, or luck, or simple chance had brought them together in exactly the right moment, had given them each exactly what they needed when they needed it most. Maya had found safety and love and partnership, while Dante had discovered the family he'd thought his dangerous life made impossible. Standing in the doorway of Isabella's room, watching their daughter sleep peacefully in the home they'd built together, Maya knew that some love stories began in the most unexpected places. Sometimes the person who saved you became the person you were meant to save in return, and sometimes the scariest elevator ride of your life delivered you exactly where you belonged. Dante's arms came around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder as they watched their daughter dream. "Perfect," he murmured, and Maya knew he meant not just Isabella, but this moment, this life, this family that had been worth every struggle it had taken to build it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure and protect. But tonight, in the quiet peace of their home, surrounded by the love they'd chosen and fought for and earned, Maya Romano felt like the luckiest woman in the world.